Thank you. So I think it's safe to say that everybody here has too much to do. As a company founder or early employee, you can work 16-hour days, go home exhausted, work a little more, come back the next day, still feel behind. You can do that for months, years. I've done that for years myself. But I have some good news. A lot of what you do doesn't matter. A lot of it you could stop doing today and you'd be just as or even more successful. Which stuff is that? Well, that's harder to say. That's kind of the bad news. But I put a poll up on my site yesterday. I was thinking about this issue and I asked, what are the biggest productivity sinks for startups? I offered 8 suggestions and I allowed people to pick one. And here's what the bottom of the list looked like. Office distractions, too many internal meetings, not the top concern. Bugs or mistakes that we should have caught. And slow decision making. These are the bottom half of the 8. They're important, and for each of them, at least a few people said they were the #1 productivity sink for their company. So, each company has its own dysfunctionalities. But what was #1 by far over all of those? Does anyone know? Email. Close. Twitter. Turns out it's Twitter. Just kidding. But internet distractions is actually #2. It's very easy when you're working on the web to justify checking out every new web startup, seeing what you can learn, checking out the competition, checking out what the entire industry is doing in their personal lives on Ballywag. When we worked at Blogger, it's very easy to justify reading blogs. I mean, you gotta know what your users are doing with your product, right? But we kind of know that can be bad. What's much more nefarious is actual work that is even good work, no one could argue against it, it's just not nearly as important as other things you could be doing. And #1 answer on the poll, and the #1 thing in my experience that will set a startup back, is working on things that just don't matter. Now this is tricky because it kind of comes with the territory as well. It's kind of like the old saw, I know half the money I spend on advertising is wasted, I just don't know which half. With startups, you'll start many projects and maybe in retrospect which ones didn't matter, but it's really hard to know in the beginning. But I think a lot of us could up our batting average. And so I can think of a couple ways to increase the likelihood of something you're working on matters. One is to be really clear about your goals. So if you have a neat idea for a power user feature, but your real problem is that no one's coming to your site, then that power user feature doesn't matter. A lot of companies aren't clear enough about what their goal is at any given time, and that changes over time. So it could be scalability or revenue or viral growth or what have you. #2 is just being a lot more disciplined about saying, is this the most important thing I could be working on? And this sounds stupid, but we trick ourselves because we always think we can do more than, we always think we're going to get done more than we're actually going to get done. So we're looking at this thing and we're excited about working on it, and we think we're actually also going to get done this really important thing, but we're not. So you just gotta be more disciplined and say no to the first thing. And another way to cut down on work that doesn't matter, I think, is to really pay attention to how many external meetings that you accept. This isn't such a big deal in the very beginning when your head's down and trying to launch a product, and later on it can be important when you maybe hire some biz dev people. But in between, a huge distraction for a lot of startups is when they're starting to get some buzz, is taking meetings with other companies and other people. Little companies want to partner with you, big companies want to explore relationships, random companies want to sell you stuff. Very seldomly do these kind of meetings lead to really critical projects for your company. Often they don't lead anywhere, and you think, well, we'll accept the meeting, won't cost that much, and you don't think about, well, there's going to be a follow-up meeting and a bunch of emails. What's worse is when it does lead somewhere, and you end up doing this months-long project with some company, it's not really important to them, and doesn't really matter to your bottom line. So my advice is just say no as much as possible, as hard as that can be, and really focus on what matters. And I'm out of time. Thank you.